However, like many stars of Hollywood, Ken's actual life wasn't being as laid back as the characters he played. In the background, he had his share of arguments, resentments, and disappointments, about which he said nothing for the majority of his life. How many individuals are unaware that, prior to his passing, at last Ken disclosed the identities of 5 he really couldn't bear the stars. Star Show influenced him so much that he carried those emotions all the way to the conclusion. This video will guide you through those startling admissions, revealing the true tales of the conflicts and why Ken Curtis decided to talk about them at last. However, before we start, if you enjoy classic movies or Ken Curtis, Western films, remember to please subscribe to our channel. Curtis Wayne Gates was Ken Curtis's birth name, July 2, 1916, in the tiny community of Lamar, Colorado. His early years didn't resemble the he would eventually learn about life in Hollywood, and in actuality it was uncommon in comparison to most children of his age. In fact, Ken was raised in a jail house due to the fact that his father, Dan Gates, served as Bent County's sheriff. Living in a house was a requirement of the employment. Tiny apartment directly above the county prison. Rather than using front lawns for recreation similar to other kids, Ken's early iron bars filled the playground with footsteps that reverberate and the sound of a cell door shutting. Sneed. His mother Gates was employed as a jail cook. She's not just looked out for her family, but I'll say cooked food for the inmates. Ken frequently observed her delivering meals via the bars, providing him with a view of a world that most kids never witnessed. It was an alternative form of childhood, one that remained with him throughout the remainder of his life. Ken Curtis displayed artistic talent from an early age, particularly when it had to do with music. However, during the Great Depression and common sense exceeded aspirations, and his parents inspired him to look for a stable profession, that is, they suggested. Ken enrolled at Colorado College to get a medical degree, for he attempted to pursue that course for a while. However, he felt in his heart that medicine wasn't where his heart was. He kept hearing the call of music. After 2 years, he took the audacious choice to abandon medical school and adhered to his love of singing. It was America was still getting better, following the Great Depression and the World War II. Future seems uncertain with 2 looming. Nevertheless, Ken's gamble quickly started to pay off. He got his first job in the early 1940s. Huge surprise when he received an invitation to join Tommy Dorsey as a vocalist in his band. Dorsey was a well-known bandleader already, and he had one of the best orchestras. Favored throughout the nation. Soon later, Ken joined the gang. The fact that Frank Sinatra had left was an acceptable behavior to follow. However, with his sleek voice and innate charisma on stage, he won over audiences in a short time. It was around this period that he changed that would characterize the remainder of his profession, that he dropped his birth certificate at Dorsey's suggestion. Curtis Wayne Gates is his adopted name. Ken Curtis, that is, it sounded cleaner, more robust, and much more appropriate for entertainment purposes. His career really got started under that name to come into being following his impact on the large band. Ken discovered a better place to live due to his proficiency in Western music. He assumed the role of main vocalist for the sons of one popular Western group as the Pioneers, featuring a devoted fan base and a series of hits on the radio and on recordings. With his cozy yet genuine tone, Ken contributed to the widespread masterpieces like Roomful of Songs About Roses and Ghost Riders in the Sky that continue to be closely associated with the Golden West music's era. Not many admirers are aware that in the late 1940s, additionally, Ken hosted a 15-minute syndicated chuck wagon as a radio show, Jamborimid, in Los Angeles. The program ran for almost 2 years and broadcast about 131 episodes. In every episode, Ken sang Western tunes, exchanging playful joking with a comedic troupe called Thending with a hymn and novelty aces. The arrangement, which combines music with narrative hinted at the style theat, would eventually define his screen persona. However, Ken wasn't content with his innate charm and charisma ultimately made the way to IA New Hollywood career. By the late 1940s and the beginning of in the 1950s, he switched to performing and playing parts in Western the Med cowboy movies and musicals, where he kept constructing the legacy that will make him a well-known figure. Curtis disclosed 5 people's names. The person he secretly didn't like in Hollywood most. James Arness is number 1. James Arness was not just the lead actor in Smoke from Guns. He served as the show's spokesperson. He played Marshall Matt for 20 years. Dylan and his imposing figure dominated almost every scene. Although despite being in his shadow, crowds adored him, was difficult for his co-stars at times. Ken Curtis, who contributed the eccentric and bringing the legendary Festus Haggen to life, having swiftly gained popularity among fans. However, Festus was becoming more and more popular, yet he was always playing second, the deputized marshal of Aries' violin. The rumors started drummers that Curtis occasionally grew annoyed by this arrangement. Admirers muttered that he hoped Festus would obtain the same level of recognition as Dylan. However, the attention seldom ever moved from Aries, whether those resentful sentiments were genuine or just conjecture. When there is no denying it, their chemistry on screen was amazing. providing spectators with some of the television's most memorable moments past Milburn. Stone is number 2. Milburn Stone was a wise man who Doc Adams, who was frequently irritable, was one of their most well-known Gunsmoke actors. Gunsmoke actors. Having been there since the beginning, he had some authority at first and guardedness of his position. Ken conversely, Curtis became a member of their years after the show, and by the time he went and came, the cast was already in place. Unique cadence based on rumors circulating behind the scenes. Stone and Curtis weren't always on the same page. Eye to eye. Some expressed their disagreements. Sprang from disagreements in script directives. How long each character stayed on screen. Both men had a reputation for being strong-willed. Additionally, when two such egos clash and cause sparks, are certain to take off. However, these disputes were never sufficient to eclipse their professionalism. Their encounters on screen frequently appeared genuine, which could have been partly driven by the very genuine behind the cameras. Emotions are brewing. John Mantley is number 3. When it arrived, the dispute with producer John Mantley appeared to be more like rumors than actuality. Mantley had a reputation for being a tight. He was rigorous and tight about budgets on scripts and frequently ran afoul of actors who desired further artistic input. Among those actors was Curtis. The Festus had become a well-liked figure, and Curtis believed he was worthy of not just more screen presence, but more equitable compensation, according to reports. Curtis and Mantley butted heads on several occasions over Thes. Curtis desired for Festus to change, become a more important person, and Mantley didn't always share, but city that idea. This conflict over innovation and recompense are too oft rare instances in which Curtis's anger wasn't merely expressed in whispers. Hearsay, but real disputes that individuals subside all around the set. Amanda Blake is number 4. Amanda Miss Kitty, played by Blake, was the center of Dodge City, a powerful, flaming, and self-reliant woman who added depth and warmth to the performance. For many years she was one of the most beloved stars in Gunsmoke, be admirers everywhere. However, as time passed and Festus became more common, rumors of conflict between Curtis and Blake started to spread. A few stated that Blake wasn't happy with the increasing popularity of Curtis on the show, having the impression that it pulled some diverting attention from her long-standing. Some people think that the competition was fan-fueled, inflated rumors tabloids as well. However, reports of initial friction continued. Nevertheless, when you view this, it's difficult to ignore the sincere connection between Kitty and whether there was actual tension or they never allowed it in their performances. Show, which demonstrates their professionalism. Dennis Weaver is number 5. Prior to Ken was Curtis ever on the guns, Dennis Weaver had already had the upper hand. The audience as Marshall, Chester Good, Dylan's first deputy. Chester's limpid, he was adored for his folksy charm, personality. Additionally, once Weaver left the show to seek out fresh chances, fans questioned whether anyone could take his place. Curtis came into play at that point. Festus Haggen. Initially, analogies between Chester and Festus were inevitable. According to some, Curtis was always burdened with that analogy. Although Weaver had progressed to their endeavors, his shadow remained. Supporters conjectured that Curtis might have disliked Weaver's legacy in private. Even however, Festus ultimately carved out his own personality and gained the same level of affection. If Curtis didn't actually like Weaver or felt the strain of having to live up to a forerunner, that much is clear. Taking the place of such a well-liked character was a difficult undertaking, and Curtis was able to pull it. Was executed brilliantly. Ken Curtis starred in a number of movies. It combined frontier with music, a perfect fit for someone who was gifted in both singing and having a strong affinity for cowboys. His association with a few of the leading figures in Hollywood westerns in the near future came after. However, Festus ultimately carved out his own personality and gained the same level of affection. If Curtis didn't actually like Weaver or felt the strain of having to live up to a forerunner, that much is clear. Taking the place of such a well-liked character was a difficult undertaking, and Curtis was able to pull it. It was executed brilliantly. Ken Curtis starred in a number of movies. It combined frontier with music, a perfect fit for someone who was gifted in both singing and having a strong affinity for cowboys. His association with a few of the leading figures in Hollywood westerns in the near future came after. Ken started going to John regularly. Ford movies, which frequently share the screen with John Wayne and other great. These weren't minor components. He performed significant parts in several classics and established a presence on film that stood out even with stars as Dominantas Morden O'Hara and Wayne. His Ken's film career was already remarkable. EIDN. Single quotes to hesitate to explore lesser-known endeavors. He made appearances in adventure movies and low-budget westerns that have subsequently gained a loyal following. He wasn't trying to find the largest or most glitzy parts, rather hell-cut for people who have heart, grit, and an element of genuineness. However, all of that would ultimately be overtaken by the function that established Festus Haggen for millions, Ken Curtis. He joined the Gunsmoke cast in 1964, among the longest-running television shows and most popular programs. Back then, the series was going through a significant change. Chester Good was portrayed by Dennis Weaver, had departed, and the manufacturers required someone who could infuse new vitality without offending devoted followers. Ken Waste's response: Festus was supposed to show up. Only time, yet viewers instantly bonded with him. His raspy voice, offbeat comedy combined with down-home charm created He Will Always Be Remembered. Festus was stern, humorous, and devoted, but never too sentimental. With time, he became the focal point of the performance, and Ken held the position for 11 years, showing up in more than 300 episodes off-screen. Ken came to the project with the same commitment he made to the screen. He honored the legacy of the show and didn't ever call in a show even when the script started to repeat, or despite his demanding schedule, Ken gave every scene his all. As opposed to many actors who become weary with being recognized by a single, he accepted it as character. He frequently said being a part of something made him proud, that had great significance for people. Particularly when television began starting tooth American emotional glue families. However, away from the camera and behind the however, Ken's existence wasn't devoid of. Nevertheless, he had to deal with heartache, made tough decisions, and suffered a personal catastrophe with few admirers never became aware of. The focal point of everything was his wife, a constant influence that molded his life and supported him in ways that most people don't saw for the most of his career. Ken Curtis portraying the devoted and endearing cowboy, but his true story of love was anything but easy. In the background, his early experiences influenced his personal existence, heartbreaks, Hollywood's demands, and ultimately a love that would result in enduring tranquility for him prior to his encounter with Tori, the lady who would remain with him until the end. Ken had 2 failed marriages. Silently disappointed, he married an actress for the first time, Lorraine Page, in 1943. Back then, Ken was just starting his musical career and his initial steps into the movie industry, but Lorraine had some moved in and had a few small acting credits. Comparable entertainment circles. The young married couple, caught up in the fast-paced entertainment industry and the ambiguity of America during the war. The marriage was short, specifics a few, but it concluded peacefully and without kids. People who were acquainted with them claimed that their occupations drew them in many directions, and they just growing apart. Ken's second union attracted more radio to the person he married. When he married Barbara in 1952, Ford, the renowned director's daughter, John. At the time, Ken was already collaborating with John Wayne and Ford on a series of profitable Western movies. Becoming a member of the Ford family came with press, but with its drawbacks. Barbara had been raised in the midst of a powerful and infamously whereas Ken, despite being respected and didn't have a desire for Thestard in or prospered in Hollywood social circles. The couple was married for more than 12 years, yet the demands of celebrity and Ken's dedication to Barbara's personal goals and Gunsmoke finally tore them apart. They split in 1964, discreetly and without causing any public controversy. Ken treated it with honor, as he usually did. Items throughout his life. In 1966, just 2 years later, when Ken first met Tori Connolly, she would alter his life. In contrast to his prior partners, Tori did not participate in Hollywood and didn't care about being famous. She was sincere, kind, and grounded, the type of individual that could make anybody have a familial sense. From the start, she accepted Ken as more than just a friend, but in a male form. She backed his efforts on gun, but never tampered with his reputation. Every day, their love deepened. Moments, vacations, home dinners, shared a chuckle that didn't require any viewers. Even though Tori and Ken never had kids together, family life remained paramount. To their house, Tori had 2 kids. From a prior union, and Ken turned into a loving father role model. He cherished them. Completely, demonstrated by example, and established a patient and nurturing home. Above, over the years, Ken frequently talked about his life, considering Tori to be among his best. Being around Tori evoked Akin's more tender side. The diligent, the solemn man, relaxed and at ease. Comfort. She urged him to remain and slow down, linked to the external world Hollywood, and have fun. Following when Gunsmoke stopped, she stayed with him. Free, emotionally stable, and grounded from the conflicts over ego that many of his contemporaries. Ken and Tori traveled together, not for labor, but just for the sake of living. From cross-country travel to fishing excursions, travels to Western festivals in tiny towns, they treasured every second they spent together. Ken was still recognizable to fans everywhere they went, but the publicity was inconsequential. Tori accepted it politely, realizing the significance of the relationship. Ken had developed a rapport with his audience later in life. The couple lived silently away from the commotion of Hollywood. They continued to be loyal to one another. For decades, an uncommon accomplishment in any world, but particularly in the entertainment sector. However, even in this seemingly ideal tale of love, life behind closed walls was never entirely fluid. The life of Ken Curtis was spent away from a man who hardly ever looked for dispute for the majority of his career. He was cautious, stayed away from the frequently swirling noise surrounding the fame of Hollywood. However, even someone as sensible and privately, because Ken was unable to fully avoid notice and spend some time in his life occasionally piqued interest for reasons he didn't mean. The most noteworthy instance occurred in 1987, long after the conclusion of Gunsmoke's legendary run. CBS had declared a Gunsmoke return as a TV reunion film. Returning James Arias to Dodge as Matt Dillon Marshall. Naturally, fans anticipated Ken Curtis's comeback as Festus, the role he had performed in more than 300 episodes, and who had turned into one of the faces that people loved the most. However, as the special came on, Ken was not visible, and admires noticed right away. His absence caused doubts and disillusionment. Was there a falling out? If he had stepped away from, was he acting, or was he too sick to show up? Though the reality was much easier, but many people find it frustrating. Ken was requested to re-evaluate his responsibilities. However, the negotiations broke down quite fast. According to some sources, he was provided what he saw as a disrespectfully low pay, particular FIFA, someone who was so essential to the show. He turned down the offer, but not because but for moral reasons.